Hey, you, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Midnight Madness Chats with Hardman. I've got a great guest on the air tonight. This is part two. Please introduce yourself once again and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Rosen. I have been a rock and roll journalist for about 5 decades now. Along the way, I've sort of interviewed just about every major iconic guitar player in the world. You know, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Pete Townsend, David Gilmour, Richie Blackmore, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani. In 1977, I met Edward Van Halen, and we began a relationship that lasted until 2003. And I wrote a book that came out in 2021 titled Tonechaser about those remarkable 26 years I spent with him.
We spoke quite a bit about Eddie Van Halen and your relationship, and it actually was quite a tragic story. I remember the goosebumps I got while you were telling me the story till the end. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on your journalism, um, the things that the bands you have interviewed, other than Eddie Van Halen as well. So let's talk a little bit about Cream, Rolling Stone. How was it like being a writer for these, massive Titan magazines in a sort of the golden era of music?
It was incredible, to be honest. You really felt, and I hate to use the expression, but you really felt like you were part of something special. Look, I understand that the internet and it allows more access and more people can kind of see you and this and that. But to my mind, it doesn't have anywhere near the sort of hands-on poignancy of holding a magazine in your hand. And back in the day, publications like Rolling Stone, which is really considered the touchstone for everything. I mean, if you were a music journalist, if you were any kind of a writer, a political writer, business writer, you wanted to be in Rolling Stone. And Cream were such an iconic magazine, and editors like Lester Bangs, who was very famous in his own right as a sort of personality, as a cult figure. He was one of the editors there. And I famously actually have 2 rejection notices signed by Lester Bangs when I pitched stories to Cream early on. But it was sort of a nascent period for these magazines because they were just starting to sort of emerge. Look, Rolling Stone had been around since, I think their first issue is probably 67, 68. They were there a little bit earlier, but I don't think the first issue of Cream really came out until maybe 69 or 70. So when I began writing for these magazines, really around 73, they hadn't been around that long. And it was just a remarkable time. These magazines needed freelance writers. So the doors were opened a little more. I mean, you still had to, have something to say, and you had to kind of, come to them with something original. But the doors were wide open, and it was amazing. And it's funny. Just this morning, I posted about interviewing Bad Company in 1974. And in August of 74 is when I had my first little piece in Rolling Stone printed. And I wrote about what that felt like. And honestly, man, it's like, I don't even know how much they paid. It was probably, I don't know, $75. I would have paid them. But to be in Rolling Stone, man, to see your byline, because I'd been chasing Rolling Stone really for a long time. And again, I have rejection notice from Rolling Stone earlier on. So it was amazing. I mean, you really felt special. The sense that people were kind of holding this magazine and reading your stories. It really was a community sort of editors at the magazines, of publicists at the record companies, management, and you really were sort of all working together. Management wanted articles on their bands, and the magazines wanted stories, and publicists, the labels were pitching bands. So it was really an amazing time to sort of be this journalist, um, making his bones, as it were, and trying to, get your stuff in all of these amazing magazines. It was a remarkable time.
So this is a little bit of a personal thing to me. Someone once asked me, how do you get to interview some of, the big guys in the industry? And to be honest with you, me being South African, I'm not part of the global scene as much as American journalists and podcasters are. And I say, normally I have this stupid little saying that I say it's 99% rejection. And it's a funny thing because like I try everyone and I've done some pretty good interviews before. Would you say that this is a principle that you also had, or did you have a little bit of a more smooth sailing?
It was never smooth sailing. And I really applaud you for doing what you're doing because, yes, I mean, being South African is, I mean, obviously it's a big city and there's music and bands, blah, blah, blah. But yes, it is a little removed from, my experiences. I mean, basically, I lived in the Hollywood Hills while I was writing. So I was 5 minutes away from the labels and some of the magazines. Rolling Stone actually had an office, 20 minutes from where I lived. So yes, having that connection certainly helped. But rejection, my God, I kept the rejection notices I mentioned earlier, was rejected by Cream multiple times, by Rolling Stone, by Guitar Player. Guitar Player, I would ultimately go on to write for them for about 6 years. And in that period, out of a possible 72 issues that came out, 12 issues a year for 6 years, I wrote 16 covers. So it was like one every 3.5 covers. Every 3.5 issues was my cover story. But they rejected me, man. They all rejected me. And it got worse than that. I mean, and some of the rejections were form letters. Some were, wow, this just, you really shouldn't, this is not what we're looking for, and it's not very good, and you're really not a very good writer. And I'm jumping subjects a little bit. I went to UCLA, which is a very big university here. And I took some English classes, and I write about this in Tonechaser. And this English teacher, man, absolutely crucified me. I mean, I would hand in papers. He goes, my God, this is not good. You'll never make it as a writer and this and that, So to get back to your original thought, yes, man, it was all about rejection. And I think one of the beautiful things about youth is, I mean, you're so pig-headed and you're so stubborn. It's like, you don't like what I do? Okay, I'm going to go knock on somebody else's door, and I'll circle back around and I'll knock on your door again. And I'll knock on your door again until you, issue a cease and desist, from bothering you. It really was. And you think about that, the way you've described it is maybe if it was so easy that maybe everybody could do it. I mean, and quite honestly, the fraternity of music journalists, at least when I was writing, I mean, look, I'm not saying I was the only one, but I'm not saying that at all. But there were, I don't know, maybe 100 people whose names you saw over and over. And that was the reason for that, I believe, Now, some of these guys were truly brilliant writers, and I got it, But I have a feeling that most of them were banging on doors and getting those doors shut. So maybe it's like, that just that prize that's just out of reach, and you keep going for it. And once you're able to sort of, grab hold of it a little bit, you are not going to let go, and that gives you the impetus, right? Like a ladder, you sort of, well, man, you did that interview with that guy. And so now you use that as a springboard. Now you're going to reach out to this guy and your favorites, and certainly you understand that process. But it really was that. And yes, it was to say it wasn't discouraging, I mean, that would be a lie. Certainly you felt that. To think that, oh my God, maybe I really can't do this. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't know enough about music. Certainly those thoughts go through your head. But, you know, you put them aside, because I think that the pursuit, if it's strong enough and it's what you really want to do, you'll find a way in somehow. And you may not end up writing for Rolling Stone. Not that I only did 3 stories for them, but you'll find a way to somehow do it. You'll write for local papers. In this day and age, you could put your own blog together. But yes, I think that it surely was built on rejection. You know, nothing in worthwhile. They say nothing worthwhile in life comes easily. I don't know.
So I think the biggest thing is that consistency is key. But coming back to your interviews and things, who would you say was the most difficult interview that you've ever done?
It's sort of a multi-pronged question. So I think what you're referring to is who was sort of the most challenging, or you know, not accessible. Let me just comment on the other side of that. So when I look at the most difficult, the musicians that I loved and I knew a lot about, sometimes I found those challenging, because I wanted to go in and I wanted to come away with this brilliant interview. And in some situations that they were difficult, because I put so much pressure on myself because of that. And I can name all of those. But in answer to your question, Frank Zappa he was challenging, man. He had a very, very sarcastic wit. And, you know, I remember the first time I interviewed him, this is pretty early, it's probably like 74, 75. I was actually writing for an English newspaper called Sounds. I'd sort of become like a de facto correspondent in the U.S. for Sounds, which was an amazing experience. And I remember interviewing Frank, and Zappa in the UK and in Europe was huge, and maybe even bigger than he was in America. I mean, he was like this cult hero. And so I remember one of the first questions was sort of, you know, Frank, how did you get into music, or what were those early, you know, iterations of the Mothers like, you know? And his first response was, well, you know, you're asking me a question that has been churned out by other journalists, and you're just kind of regurgitating what they wrote. I mean, it was like one insult on the other, saying, you can't come up with any better question than that. And the reason I asked those questions is because for Sounds and for the English audience, that was new. They had never done interviews with Frank before. And I tried to explain that to him, you know. So then he goes through like this cursory, well, you know, I began playing when I was 12, and the first Mothers band was when I was 18, and you know, and I was like, oh my God, seriously, man? And it just got progressively worse. I interviewed him again in '77 for what was going to be a cover story in Guitar Player. Frank knew this was going to be a cover story in Guitar Player magazine, and he was on his best behavior. It was a really good interview. He answered every question. He was on his best behavior. He didn't give me any crap, because he knew, don't piss off the writer who's writing the cover story for Guitar Player magazine. Guitar Player magazine carried a lot of weight back in the day, and to have a cover, you know, was a pretty cool thing. Frank Zappa was not easy. Todd Rundgren was not easy. Some more obscure guys, Doc Watson, who was more like a fingerstyle, kind of a folksy artist. He was not friendly. Marshall Crenshaw was kind of a singer-songwriter guy, was not friendly. Jimmy Page, man, that was a tough one. So I'm out on the road with Zeppelin in 1977 for Guitar Player magazine. I had been pitching Swan Song, Zeppelin's label, literally for months and months and months. Hey, can I do a story? Hey, Guitar Player wants a story. Hey, can we do something? No. Yes, you can go out on the road with them. So I go out on the road with them. And I literally had to sit in my hotel room for 3 days waiting for Jimmy to talk. And they told me, don't leave your hotel room, because if we call and Jimmy wants to talk and you're not there, well, you missed the opportunity. So I was literally like this prisoner in paradise. I mean, it was a beautiful hotel room and I had everything I wanted, but still I couldn't go outside. You know, I was in Chicago. You know, I couldn't walk around. I couldn't go down to the lobby. You know, I was afraid to leave. So I finally get the phone call, and to make kind of what was a long story a little bit shorter, he was just inaccessible in a way. And I would ask questions, and his memory wasn't great. It was just difficult. I mean, I really had to dig and pry. And Jimmy, you know, at one point he went to the bathroom and he came out and he was fucked up when I walked in there. I mean, let's be honest. And he came out, you know, he was really fucked up. And so at one point he mentioned something about using, you know, the Les Paul on a track. And I go, excuse me, Jimmy, wasn't that the Telecaster? You know? And so at that point I was like, you know, feeding him, you know, which is not the kind of interview I wanted. The interview itself was okay. Let's fast forward to 86. He's with the firm, and I go in, and literally out of the box, the first question I asked, which I thought was a pretty good question, something about, well, Jimmy, you know, it must be different working with Paul Rodgers, the singer for the firm, versus Robert Plant. I mean, Paul is a guitar player, and he's a different kind of singer. You know, is it different? And he goes, well, fuck you, man. Fuck, of course it's different. What do you think it wouldn't be different, you know? And I'm going, I mean, it's as if the question antagonized him, or I was somehow insulting him when it was just a question. And through the entire conversation, he was like that. His guitar tech, forget his name, Tim Martin, was there in the room. And I think Tim felt so sorry for me that a couple times he would interject and sort of, oh yeah, well, Jimmy uses the string bender on his Telecaster, and to try to smooth things over. By the end of that interview, I had developed a migraine headache. I almost ended up throwing up all over Jimmy's shoes, literally, because those are one of the symptoms of a migraine. Luckily, I made it through the interview. I ran back to my room and got sick. But Jimmy Page was not a walk in the park. You know, most of them were cool. Some of them I could tell they just did not want to be there on that day, you know? And I kind of chalked it up, or I tried to chalk it up. Hey, anybody can have a bad day. But if it got to the point where they were kind of insulting or demeaning, or they made me feel like I didn't know what I was talking about, then I really took umbrage at that. To my credit, I never once walked out on an interview, though I was tempted to several times, because the truth of it is, if it, you know, happened later on after I've been writing for a few years, it's like, I don't need this in my life, you know? I don't need this kind of grief, but I never did that. Robert Fripp, oh my God, I love King Crimson. I thought they were an amazing band. So I go in there to sit down, you know, and this is pre-computer. So all my questions are typewritten, you know, and I have like 10 pages of questions. And I go in there and sit down in the hotel room, and he can see that there are questions typed, and he reaches out and he slides the questions over to him, and he turns them around, and he starts reading the question as if he was the interviewer. So, you know, he's reading. So, Robert, tell me what it was like when you grew up in Bournemouth, England, or wherever he was from, I can't remember. And then he would answer. And so Robert, when did you get your first guitar? Well, I got my first guitar when I was 11. And he did that, you know, to the entire interview. And I thought, fuck you. You know, I mean, it was so insulting. At the end of it, I said to him, I go, you know, I really spent a lot of time putting this interview together, and I really had a lot of respect for you as a player. And I didn't deserve to be treated that way. And he said something. So I wrote the story, and the interview it wasn't bad. It was good, um, And a little bit later, he sends me a Christmas card and a little note, and it said, "You would have to know me to know I was not being insulting. That's just who I am." And I thought, you know what? Okay, at least he had the the decency, of being a human being to explain that to me. But that was a little difficult. And I'm sure there were some others along the way. Again, not a whole lot. I mean, I've probably done, I don't know, 2,000, 2,500 interviews in my life, and maybe 50 of them were challenging, not good. But yeah, they happened. They definitely happened. I'm sure they've happened to you. But like you, I'm sure that most of the conversations you've had have been great and illuminating, and they were probably heroes of yours, like they were heroes of mine, and gratifying, and I always felt like I was lucky to be there. I never lost sight of that. So yeah, but there were some challenging ones, to be sure.
Yeah, so I must admit, since I started doing this, this is fucking amazing. Like talking to other people in bands and people that know music and hearing their stories. I fucking love it. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm talking about it. And um, it's a privilege. It's yeah, they are the difficult ones. I've had, I must admit, I've been extremely lucky. I had about one or two guys that were a little bit cocky in the interviews, but I cut most of the like where they start challenging me a bit uh, out of the interview anyway. So interesting. But you mentioned that with Jimmy Page you had a bit of difficulty. Do you have like a secret weapon that you use when you find yourself in a situation where the musician is not 100% cooperating? Do you have like something that you do to kind of comfort them?
That is a great question. My yardstick for an interview was trying to sort of transcend the conversation between interviewer and interviewee, and where it's a little more formal, and trying to break that down where it becomes a conversation between two people talking about this. Because let's face it, who doesn't really like to talk about themselves? I mean, everybody does, and these are musicians. These are, high profile people. They've led extraordinary lives. We are sitting there in the room with them because they've created something that everybody wants to know about. So for me, it was laying for that question that was going to open up that thing in them that revealed to them, hey, that guy sitting across the table from me asking me questions is more than just somebody sitting there doing a job asking me questions. He really understands me. He really, cares about what I do. Now, all of this, is probably not that formalized in their brain, but there's something triggered in them. And what I always used was trying to come up with questions that really made them dive deeper into who they were and what they created, not just so you're using the Les Paul for the second Aerosmith, great, and that reveals certain information that people want to know, especially if it's for a guitar-centric, musician-oriented magazine, and I was writing for a lot of those. So Joe, and I'm just making this up, but I'll give you a perfect example. You talk, and I'll tie in your last question. You talk about people who are difficult to talk to. Oh my God, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Oh my God, I loved Tull. I thought they were amazing. I mean, I thought the Stand Up, Benefit, and Aqualung records with three of the greatest records ever made. You know, you talk about bands that had three, absolutely amazing records in a row. You know, Tull is never mentioned. They're always dismissed. I thought he was an amazing songwriter and a vocalist. He was an incredible guitar player. So I was out on the road with them. This is during the minstrel and the gallery period. And so we sit down to talk, and the first question he asks me is, have you heard the new record? And I hadn't heard the new record because it wasn't even out yet. I hadn't even been sent a test pressing, and that pissed him off. He goes, you're sitting here talking to me, and you haven't heard the record? And I go, well, I don't have the record, you know. He goes, go listen to the cassette, you know. And part of me understood it, not hearing a band's latest record. Now I blame that on the record company or management. So I go back to the hotel room and I'm listening to the cassette and I'm trying to take notes, and so maybe it was later in the day or the next day. So I go back in and we start talking, and he's still difficult. I think he's still pissed off, he's still angry. So in answer to your question, I'm thinking, okay, man, this is going to go nowhere, unless you somehow find that release point. So I asked him something about, and this is a question I often use. I go, so Ian, would you sort of look at the chronology of Tull as sort of like, you had that first record with Mick Abrams, and then kind of that, a benefit stand up and Aqualung Records, and then it went to the Thick as a Brick, where it sort of got more orchestrated. And I knew I could tell by looking at it, I could see the posture, I sort of relaxed a little bit. He goes, yeah, I think so. That was like our first three, and that opened it up. Now look, it's not like after that he was a breath of fresh air, but it's those types of questions. David Gilmour, I mean, obviously you're going to talk about the Dark Side of the Moon, but David, what was it in the songwriting process that changed? Where did the input, just a kind of a multi-pronged question that they have to dive deeper, And I used to ask Edward those kinds of questions because he always used to say, oh, well, I hate interviews. I don't like it doing interviews. The truth is he was pretty good at doing interviews. But he had been asked that same question so many times. Edward, where did the tapping thing come from? And Edward, you were using the Marshalls with the modified Strat. Okay. So I used to ask him those same types of questions. And, how did the songwriting change? Or, do you remember, playing that one little riff in the song back in the day and that becoming, I can't remember exactly. And he'd sometimes get a little perturbed. I goes, well, man, I don't fucking remember that. And that was a long time ago, but I keep pushing, and sometimes it would work. And he'd go, yeah, and sometimes he'd go, I don't fucking remember, man. Ask me something else, But that was a great question. And I'll tell you, I've sat in on interviews with really amazing journalists. I mean, these guys were like, they had degrees in journalism. They were big time writers, and I could tell that the progression of the interview, it was wrong. It was awkward. It would jump subjects. They weren't connected. Which are all things that we would strive to do, right? You're kind of building a story with them, and like you say, you're trying to gain their trust and respect, and make you think that you really know and care about their music, and you're not just kind of and there's that fine line between doing that and just being a nerd geeking out, who's able to sit in a room with them for a half hour, or just just somebody, you're a friend, but it's more than a friend. You're there for a gig. So yeah, it's all those things. But I think looking for that point where it tips from interviewer and interviewee, making them dig a little deeper, listening really closely to the music, that you're interviewing them about, and not just, going at the surface, really digging deep for one little phrase in a solo or one, turnaround or one chord progression. Oh my God, you're changing from major to minor keys. And I forget, there was some songwriter in some song who did that. It was really brilliant. And I mentioned that. Go, oh wow, that's cool. You recognize it. So um, I mean, tools you probably use, but yeah, it's the art of the interview. I never thought I was the greatest writer in the world. I thought I was a good writer, but I thought what I did do well was the interview. And I think that's what they responded to. And if you do a good interview, you can extract this great stuff from the artist, and then in a way you don't have to be such a great writer because you have such great stuff to write about. So anyway, that's that was my formula anyway.
We're coming to the end of this episode. I had a great time, and it's very interesting climbing into your mind and hearing all the stories you have to tell. So definitely, guys, if you're watching this episode, the links for Tonechaser, the audio book will be in the description above and in the previous video, and the hard copy as well. And we will chat about getting it into South Africa if any South Africans are interested. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was once again such a privilege interviewing you.
Cool, man. So I want to hear your favorite interviews.
My favorite interviews. So it's probably not the biggest artist I have interviewed, but it's the biggest local artist I've interviewed. It's a guy called Hunter Kennedy. He plays for a local band called Fokov Polisikar, and they're probably the biggest band in this country right now because they just opened for Green Day.
Oh wow!
So they're a big band, and it's just he was such an interesting guy. And when I met him I've met him a few times in life, but none of them really mattered really because it was like a hi, how you, bye kind of. But I met him in a hotel in Pretoria, and we kind of spoke a little bit, and that was a pinnacle moment for me because that was my foot into the door, if you know what I mean. And then we spoke, and he was such a fucking cool guy. He just, sometimes you look at these, big rock stars, and you think, holy shit, these guys are going to be assholes. And he wasn't. He was actually one of the nicest guys ever, and he engaged in the questions. And I asked him, he's a very good lyricist, so my questions were very much based on his writing style and what went through his head. And he like kind of just climbing into his mind a little bit was phenomenal. And that was like, I asked him a specific question, and he said to me, something about it's open to artistic interpretation. But the way he explained it just like blew my mind because I love lyrics myself. I love poetry. And when I review music and stuff, the first thing I check out is the lyrics. Like that's number one for me. Like I'll listen to the music. I'm a guitarist myself. I play drums a bit. And number one for me is lyrics. Like, is it good lyrics? So that was just a interesting chat.
Yeah, man, that's cool. I love the idea that you're there, and this band is already huge in South Africa, but you talking to them, you're doing your podcast, you getting the word out there, you becoming this, key part of kind of the legacy of the band because it's true. I look back at the bands I interviewed early in the day. A lot of these bands that went on to do bigger things. But back then they were just releasing first records, and they couldn't pay a writer to sit in a room with them. I mean, seriously. So to be part of that, and a band's growth and stuff. I mean, that's great. That's fantastic.
Until next time, I've been Hardman.